September 17th, 1998. In the frozen heart of Alaska, where the silence of the early morning seems to swallow any human sound, a small monitoring station stood awake. The antennas turned slowly against the dark sky, their motors creaking under the weight of accumulated ice, while old monitors flickered with green and red lights, like tired eyes watching an invisible horizon. Inside the main room, the air was heavy, tinged with the metallic smell of cables and the stale coffee forgotten on the tables. Most operators fought against sleep, dozing over papers and wavelogs that rarely changed. It was just another ordinary night, or so it seemed. Among them was someone rarely noticed. He arrived before the others, always. He wasn't the head of operations, nor was he responsible for reports or analyses. His role seemed mundane. Clearing ice from solar panels, checking cables, adjusting receivers that groaned with the passing wind. An invisible worker, almost a shadow, moving through corridors and antennas without anyone calling him by name. Many of the newer operators barely knew his exact function. To them, he was just there, like part of the station itself, an old piece that had never been replaced. And yet, there was something about him that unsettled people. He didn't use a radio. He didn't have a cell phone. He never joined the conversations in the mess hall. His movements were deliberate, like someone who had repeated every gesture hundreds of times. When others talked about television, family, or life far from the station, he listened in silence, his gaze always fixed on the sky, as if searching for something the others couldn't see. On that night, however, that silence would break, not with words, but with a detail that would forever change how everyone saw him. While the computers emitted their monotonous hum and the wind battered the metal structure, something began to emerge. First, it was a faint vibration, almost imperceptible in the receiver panels. Then, a strange sound, as if the frequencies themselves were trying to escape the machines. The younger operators frowned, confused. The veterans, too tired to care, merely adjusted knobs, expecting no results. And it was in that moment, in that second, when nothing seemed out of the ordinary, that the invisible became inevitable. Because while everyone was distracted, someone noticed something. Not on the monitors, not on the antennas, but on him. The silent man who was always there, unnoticed and discreet. Under the collar of his worn jacket, something glinted. A faint, almost pulsating light escaped from his skin, like blood turned into fire. It wasn't a reflection nor an illusion. It was a scar, a hidden mark that shouldn't have been there. In that frozen midnight, reality bent. The mystery took shape, and everyone in that station instinctively realized they were not in the presence of someone ordinary. That night, the skies didn't just open. They chose who was ready to see. That phrase echoed, not spoken but felt, by everyone who witnessed the detail. Because what was about to happen didn't fit in official reports or archives. It was the kind of encounter that doesn't ask for permission to occur. It simply happens, and it changes forever those who dared to look. On that September 17th, the monitoring station in Alaska ceased to be just another forgotten outpost amidst ice and wind. It became the stage for something greater, something beyond human comprehension. And at the center of it all was that invisible worker, marked by something none of them dared to explain. And you, if you had been there, if you had seen that same glow hidden beneath his skin, would you have the courage to believe what your eyes showed you? Or would you close them, pretending nothing had changed? Because, from that night on, nothing would ever be the same. The monitoring station in Alaska had always been a place of routine. Nothing happened beyond the expected. Radio waves analyzed, signals decoded, reports sent to offices that often didn't even reply. But there was one figure who stood out in this setting precisely because he blended into it so well. The silent man. He had no name among his colleagues. Some called him the technician, others the cable guy. He was never on the official duty roster, yet he always showed up before everyone else. When the first operators arrived, they'd find the panels cleared of overnight snow, the cables neatly aligned, the antennas free of ice that could jam their movement. It was as if the station breathed because he kept it alive, yet no one ever thanked him. His routine was repetitive, but there was something unsettling about it. While others fumbled with heavy gloves and tools stuck in the cold, he worked with precise, calculated movements, like a surgeon in a sterile field. A screw was never loose, a cable never slipped. The antennas, always aligned, turned under his invisible command. His colleagues found it odd that he never used a radio to communicate. In a place where even asking for a wrench required a transmitter, he preferred absolute silence. If someone called him on the intercom, he rarely responded. When he appeared, he already had exactly what was needed in hand, as if he anticipated problems before they even arose. In the mess hall, the scene was always the same. While others laughed, told stories, and complained about the cold, he sat in a corner, drinking his black coffee without sugar, not saying a word. Some were bothered by this, others simply ignored him, as if he were part of the furniture. But there were those who felt a deeper unease. There was something about him that defied explanation. This discomfort grew in the details. The way he walked on ice without leaving deep tracks. The gaze that lingered in the darkness of the sky, fixed on points no one else could see. And above all, his posture, upright, steady, like someone trained their entire life to obey and act with precision. He didn't seem like a mere maintenance worker. Once, a curious young operator tried to strike up a conversation. He asked about his life outside the station, his family, why he chose to work in such an isolated place. The response was absolute silence, followed by a look that seemed to pierce through skin and touch the soul. The young man never tried again, but secrets always leave traces, and his trace was his skill. No manual explained how he could so quickly restore systems that failed during magnetic storms. No training taught how to handle ancient receivers that to everyone else seemed useless. Yet he did it, as if he had been there since the station was built. It was on one of those freezing nights, while he adjusted an external antenna under the biting wind, that a younger operator noticed something different. He had removed his gloves to fix a circuit, and for a moment his sleeve slipped, revealing part of his skin. What was seen wasn't a simple work scar or a common burn. It was a luminous mark, an irregular line that seemed to pulse beneath the skin, like liquid light. The operator froze. He didn't know if it was exhaustion playing tricks, or if he was truly witnessing something impossible. When the man noticed the fixed stare, he calmly pulled his sleeve back down, as if nothing had happened. He returned to his work with the same precision, ignoring the young man's silent shock. In the days that followed, the rumor began to spread quietly through the corridors. Some said it was just a burn from radiation in old experiments. Others recalled obscure stories of survivors of direct encounters with things that shouldn't be seen. But no one dared ask him directly, because, as invisible as he was, his presence carried weight, a warning that some questions should not be asked. Slowly, the image of that invisible worker began to change. He was no longer just the cable guy. He was someone carrying a secret etched not only in his skin but in his very existence, and you. If you had been there, standing before him, would you have had the courage to ask what that mark really was? Or would you, like the others, pretend you hadn't seen anything? Because even in silence he made one thing clear: the sky holds more than just stars, and he was living proof of that. The rumor didn't take long to spread. It wasn't spoken loudly, but it traveled in exchanged glances through the icy corridors, in hushed whispers in the mess hall, in notes scribbled in the margins of reports. Everyone had heard about the detail, but no one knew how to deal with it. That scar, if it could even be called that, had shifted the silent balance of the station. The younger operators were the most consumed by curiosity. One of them even drew what he thought he'd seen: an irregular glowing line, almost like a pulsating circuit beneath the skin. It wasn't something that could be explained as a mere accident. It didn't look like a burn. It didn't look like a wound. It looked like it was made of something else, something that shouldn't be in a human body. Slowly, the rumors took shape. "Have you heard the stories about survivors of direct encounters?" one technician whispered to another late at night. "They say some were marked literally by the energy carried by the crafts, a scar that never truly healed but pulsed as if alive." No one confirmed. No one denied. But everyone was thinking the same thing. Could he be one of them? Meanwhile, the man continued his usual routine, clearing panels, fixing cables, aligning antennas. His silence was even more unsettling now, because it seemed to carry the full awareness that everyone was watching him differently. He didn't change the rhythm of his steps, didn't alter the precise way he performed each task, but it was impossible to ignore that, suddenly, his figure had become the center of a mystery. It was as if, until that moment, he had been invisible by choice. Now the mark made it impossible for him to remain unnoticed. Eyes followed him. Comments multiplied. And yet, he remained unperturbed, as if he had always known the day would come when the detail could no longer be hidden. One night in the mess hall, while everyone spoke in hushed tones, he walked in. The clatter of cutlery stopped for a few seconds. Everyone waited for a gesture, a reaction. But he simply grabbed his coffee mug, sat in his usual corner, and remained silent. The entire room shaped itself around him, as if even the air awaited a revelation. The strangest thing, however, was the collective feeling that something was about to happen. The scar wasn't just a curiosity. It was a sign, and in the silent logic everyone built in their minds, signs never appear without purpose. Some said he was there to watch, others that he had been left at that post as a guardian. Some believed he was merely a survivor of something much larger, carrying a mark he didn't choose but that fate imposed. No one knew the truth, but everyone felt they were on the brink of a change. That same week, while the station operated under a biting cold of -40 degrees, a young operator got too close to him during an external maintenance task. Pretending to help hold a tool, he really wanted to see up close, and he did. Beneath the collar of the jacket, the scar truly pulsed, like a heart beating to a different rhythm. It wasn't just marked skin. It was like a discreet beacon, emitting signals invisible to human eyes, but perhaps not to those chosen by the skies. The young man stepped back, disturbed. He wanted to shout, to tell everyone, but he realized he didn't need to. The entire station knew. What no one said out loud was what they really thought. What if he wasn't just one of us? Each day, the atmosphere in the station grew heavier. Working side by side with him no longer felt trivial. It was like living with a secret that could explode at any moment. The monitors flickered, the antennas turned, the reports were sent, but all of that was just background. The true story centered on that invisible man who could no longer hide. And then, slowly, everyone began to notice a pattern. His fixed gaze at the sky wasn't distraction, it was vigilance, it was expectation, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. And that realization brought a deep unease. Perhaps that scar wasn't just a mark, but a call. The days passed like a silent countdown. The cold felt denser. The air seemed to vibrate differently. And deep down, everyone felt it wasn't a coincidence to be there, on that date, alongside him. Something was about to happen, and they would all be witnesses. Before we continue, if this story is already stirring in you the sense that there's much more between heaven and earth than we're told, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment below what you would do if you were faced with an encounter like this. The detail had become a revelation. The invisible could no longer hide, and the entire station lived with the certainty that soon the skies would respond. The clock in the control room marked just past midnight when the calm shattered. The air was still, so heavy it seemed to hold a silent anticipation. Then, without warning, the alarms began to scream. These weren't the usual alerts for transmission failures or the familiar sounds of atmospheric interference. It was something different. The monitors, once filled with regular frequency lines, erupted in violent distortions. Energy spikes leaped as if something invisible had crossed the skies. Antennas spun out of control, screeching against their mechanical limits. And in the background, the magnetic field sensors triggered in sequence, as if an invisible sun had risen in the middle of the Arctic darkness. Chaos engulfed the station. Operators ran back and forth, adjusting panels, shutting down circuits, trying to restore some normalcy. But the more they tried, the clearer it became. This wasn't a technical failure. It was a presence. Something had entered their space, piercing through layers of atmosphere and silence. It was then that the lights began to fail. First, an irregular flicker, then sudden blackouts that plunged the corridors into intermittent shadows. And with the shadows came a sound, a deep, metallic hum, as if the earth itself were vibrating beneath their feet. Some covered their ears, but it was useless. The sound came from within, resonating in their bones, piercing their skin. In the eastern sector, where the most sensitive equipment was located, the disaster deepened. A cloud of electromagnetic radiation began to form, visible as a glowing bluish mist that swept through the corridors. The air crackled with sparks, and the smell of ozone filled every breath. That's when panic set in. One of the researchers, too young to grasp the severity, tried to cross the corridor overtaken by radiation. She took only a few steps before collapsing, motionless, as if all her energy had been drained. The shock was immediate. No one dared approach. The sensors showed lethal energy levels. Anyone who entered without protection would die in minutes. The operators exchanged desperate glances. There was chaos, muffled screams, contradictory orders, but not him. The invisible, silent man merely lifted his gaze to the corridor, filled with glowing mist. No hurry, no tremble, just the certainty of someone who had seen this before. Without hesitation, he removed his heavy jacket, tied a cloth over his face, and walked toward the contaminated sector. The others tried to stop him, shouting that it was suicide, that no one could survive. But he ignored them. His steps were steady, measured, as if he were walking on familiar ground. With each movement, the glow of the scar beneath his skin seemed to pulse stronger, as if responding to the radiation. He crossed the corridor, overtaken by the electromagnetic storm without effort. While sparks burned walls and sensors blared at maximum alert, he moved as if the deadly field had no power over him. He knelt beside the young researcher, hoisted her onto his shoulders, and, in a precise movement, returned the way he came. Outside, the silence was absolute. All eyes were on him. Each second felt like a century. And then, when he emerged from the glowing mist, carrying the unconscious young woman, the team's collective breath returned. He gently placed her on the ground in the safe sector, without a scratch on his own body. The impact was immediate. That wasn't human. Not in the usual sense. No man could cross a corridor filled with lethal radiation without protection. No one could survive, but he had done it as if it were routine, and more, as if he knew exactly what to do. And it was at that moment that the skies answered. Outside, an operator shouted, pointing to the frozen horizon. Everyone rushed to the windows, pressing their faces against the fogged glass. Above the night sky, between torn clouds, a light appeared. First, a distant point, then a defined shape. It was a triangular object, dark, with edges illuminated by bluish bands that pulsed like the scar beneath the man's skin. It hovered in absolute silence, defying the laws they knew. For seconds, it simply stayed there, as if observing. No engines, no noise, just an immense presence that made everyone's hearts race. No one breathed. Time seemed suspended. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the object vanished. It didn't fly away. It didn't retreat. It simply ceased to exist before their eyes, as if swallowed by space itself. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the appearance itself. No one knew what to say. No one dared ask. But everyone had seen, everyone had witnessed, and everyone knew, without a shadow of doubt, that it didn't belong to Earth. The man, for his part, didn't celebrate, didn't show surprise. He simply adjusted the young woman on an improvised stretcher and returned to his corner, as if the episode wasn't extraordinary. His eyes, fixed on the now empty sky, carried the serenity of someone who had expected it. The entire station had changed. It was no longer a forgotten outpost in the ice. It was the epicenter of an encounter that couldn't be recorded in any official file, but would mark everyone present forever. And above all, it was proof that the silent worker wasn't who he seemed to be. He was something else. Guardian, survivor, messenger, no one knew. But everyone was certain of one thing. That night, they had stood before something greater than life itself. And you, if you had been there, could you have believed what you saw? Or would your mind have conjured explanations to deny the impossible? Because on that night of September 17th, the skies didn't just open. They chose to reveal themselves, and no one in the station would ever be the same. After the night of September 17th, nothing returned to normal at the station. It was impossible. What their eyes had witnessed couldn't be forgotten or hidden under technical reports or bureaucratic excuses. The operators tried to resume their routines, adjusting antennas, recalibrating systems, drafting cold reports. But the air was different. It carried a silent tension, an invisible weight that turned every gesture into reverence. At the center of this change was him. The invisible man, once unnoticed as a shadow, was now regarded with a mix of respect and fear. He was no longer just the cable guy. He had crossed a lethal electromagnetic storm, carried a colleague on his shoulders effortlessly, and shown indifference to the impossible triangular object that hovered above them. His mere presence reminded the group that they weren't alone in the universe. The younger operators avoided meeting his gaze. The veterans, once indifferent, now watched him carefully, as if recognizing something ancient in him. It was a different kind of silence, no longer the silence of being overlooked, but the silence of acknowledgement. In this atmosphere, one of the station's oldest members, A man marked by years of work and a memory that went beyond official records decided to approach him. Known as Johnson, a veteran who had been part of secret projects in the 70s, his eyes narrowed when he saw the pulsing scar beneath the man's skin. He had seen it before. Johnson didn't speak in front of everyone. He waited for the right moment. He found him alone, clearing ice from the panels with his usual patience. Approaching, cigarette in hand, he said softly, "I know what that mark is." The man didn't respond. He continued scrubbing the ice as if he hadn't heard. But Johnson pressed on. "Operation Phoenix. A buried project, but never forgotten. I saw marks like that on men who came back. Different." A thick silence hung between them, broken only by the Arctic wind. The worker paused, looked at the veteran with cold, unreadable eyes, and returned to his task without a word. That non-response was more revealing than any explanation. Johnson understood and didn't press further. He didn't need to. That look said it all. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a legend. The scar was real, and it was the mark of a past that shouldn't be told. The news spread silently through the corridors. No one dared ask, but everyone knew he wasn't just a technician. He was connected to something far greater, something beyond the functions of that forgotten station in the ice. The change in behavior was inevitable. Before, some mocked him behind his back, calling him a ghost, a shadow, or even a lunatic. After the incident, no one dared. Instead, the looks that were once of disdain or indifference became looks of respect, and in some cases, fear. When he entered the mess hall, silence fell. When he walked through the corridors, others stepped aside. When he picked up a tool, no one dared offer help. It was as if he carried an invisible authority, an aura that needed no titles, uniforms, or orders. His mere existence was enough to alter everyone's behavior. The most unsettling thing, however, was his indifference to this reverence. He didn't seek attention. He didn't smile. He didn't thank anyone. He simply remained silent, performing his mundane tasks with the same precision as always, as if nothing had changed. But everyone knew it had. In the days that followed, the station found a new rhythm. The operators, once distracted, began working with more seriousness. They knew they were under the gaze of someone carrying secrets larger than they could bear. It was as if his presence was a constant reminder that the skies were watching, and that there was something beyond the human in that cold, mechanical routine. At night, some whispered about what the mark meant. Guardian? Survivor? Experiment? No one knew. What everyone was certain of was that he wasn't just a forgotten worker. He was a living witness to something forbidden, perhaps the link between humanity and what lingered beyond the stars. No one dared treat him as invisible anymore. He had become a presence, a silent, impenetrable presence, but impossible to ignore. And could you live under that weight? Could you work side by side with someone who had crossed the impossible, who carried the mark of the unknown on their skin? Or would you succumb to fear, unable to bear the revelation that perhaps humanity isn't alone? In that frozen station, the technicians and scientists no longer needed proof. They had seen, they had felt, and the silent man, marked by the luminous scar, had become not just part of the routine, but the symbol of something that could never be forgotten. The days passed. The Alaskan winter remained relentless, freezing the ground, the wind, and even thoughts. The monitoring station returned to its routine, but everyone knew, deep down, that nothing was the same. Because once your eyes see the impossible, there's no going back to ignorance. He was still there. The silent man, who never sought recognition, continued his tasks, adjusting cables, clearing snow from panels, inspecting antennas in the biting cold. On the outside, it seemed nothing had changed, but inside, every glance cast his way carried a new weight. Before, they saw him as a shadow. Now, they saw him as a beacon. Not because of words he didn't speak, not because he imposed himself, he never did, but because of his presence, because every movement reminded them that there were forces greater than human understanding. It was strange to realize that it wasn't speeches or reports that changed the team's demeanor. It was him, his silence, his scar, his act of crossing an electromagnetic storm to save a life. Without asking for anything in return, without boasting, he had become an example, and that weighed more than any written order. The technicians, who once laughed during shifts, now worked with more focus. Research was conducted with seriousness. Even the simple act of calibrating a receiver gained importance. It wasn't just routine, it was vigilance. Everyone began to look at the sky with more responsibility, because deep down, they knew they might be watched. Not just by him, but by something greater, hidden among the stars. It was as if the scar beneath his skin was a constant reminder. There are encounters that don't fit in archives, presences that don't allow themselves to be recorded, and he was living proof of that. Sometimes, someone saw him beside the main antenna, standing still, gazing into the darkness. He would stay there for minutes, motionless, as if listening to a call no one else could hear. In those moments, the air seemed denser, and the few who watched felt a deep shiver, as if in the presence of something sacred or far too dangerous. But he never explained, never spoke a word, and perhaps that was for the best. His legacy wasn't in revelations spoken aloud, but in the silent impact he left on everyone. The researcher he carried on his shoulders, when she regained consciousness, never again doubted the existence of the impossible. The young operator who saw the scar up close never slept soundly again, knowing it wasn't human. And even the veterans, hardened by decades of reports and analyses, learned to respect what they once dismissed as myth. It was an invisible but real transformation. The station was no longer just a forgotten outpost in the ice. It had become a place of testimony. Every antenna, every panel, every report now carried the shadow of an unanswered question. What really exists out there? He never changed his routine. He continued drinking his black coffee without sugar, sitting alone in the mess hall corner. He continued walking silently through the metal corridors. He remained invisible, but now with a weight impossible to ignore. And it was in that apparent normalcy that everyone realized the true legacy. It wasn't about him. It was about the effect he caused, the discipline he inspired, the silent respect he instilled, the constant reminder that some encounters don't need proof. They simply transform. In the last scene many hold of him, he stood beside the main antenna, staring fixedly at the sky. The wind howled fiercely, the ice cracked beneath his feet, and the scar still pulsed faintly beneath his skin, like a discreet flame that never went out. He didn't need to speak. That simple detail said it all. There was something out there, and he knew some encounters aren't meant to be recorded in files. They're meant to transform those who had the courage to be there. That phrase wasn't spoken by him, but it was felt by everyone who had the chance, or the fate, to witness. Because the true encounter wasn't just with the triangular object in the sky or the electromagnetic storm that nearly killed a young woman. The true encounter was with the certainty that there were guardians among them, living in silence, waiting for the moment to act. And you, if you had seen that scar pulsing in the dark, if you had witnessed that object hovering over the ice, would you have the courage to continue living as if nothing had happened? Or would you carry, forever, the weight of knowing that humanity is just a part of a much larger story? In that remote outpost, lost in the ice and silence of Alaska, an encounter happened, and it was never recorded anywhere. No official report mentioned the electromagnetic storm that nearly paralyzed the station. No document described the strange scar pulsing beneath the skin of an invisible worker. No file referenced the triangular object that hovered in the night sky, defying all known laws. But those who were there didn't need paper or records. They carried the memory in their own eyes, a memory that forever changed how they saw the sky and themselves. Because the true impact wasn't just in what they saw. It was in what they felt. They felt fear, reverence, silence, and above all, they felt the certainty that some encounters can't be explained, only lived. The silent man of the station never sought recognition. He left no speeches, revealed no secrets, but in his presence, everyone learned that humanity isn't alone, that there are invisible guardians, people carrying impossible marks who, from time to time, reveal themselves only to remind us that greater forces are watching. His legacy isn't in the archives, but in the silent transformation he caused, in how every technician, every operator, every researcher began to look at the sky with more respect. And perhaps that was the true purpose, not to prove anything, but to awaken. Today, if someone asks about that night of September 17th, 1998, few will have the courage to speak, but everyone who was there knows the truth. The skies opened, and they chose to reveal themselves to those ready to see. And you, what would you do if you had been there? Would you have the courage to believe what your eyes witnessed? Or would you seek refuge in easy explanations, denying the impossible that revealed itself before you? If this account moved you, Subscribe to the channel now, leave a like, and share this video so more people can reflect on what really happens in the skies above us. And comment below, do you believe this encounter was real? I'll be in the comments waiting for your response.